Apologies for format, I'm on mobile. This is my first ever post, so I hope you enjoy. Dated. This took place back between 200-92-010. Can't be more specific on time, as it was a really messed up time for me then. Here's some context that I think is important. This is the Albertville/Boaz area in Alabama, where I'm not originally from. This awesome guy, let's call him George, and his family had taken in my young, stupid self. George, along with his wife, let's call her Kelly, had a group they would go on paranormal investigations with, that I joined, having been interested in such from a young age. George had a stepson, let's call him Jim, who was my age, and we became great friends. Kelly had a paper route that on some Fridays and Saturdays, me and Jim would do. So, late one Friday night, me and Jim had decided to do the paper route, since we had no investigations with the group planned that weekend. We left the house, probably around 10:30, 11 p.m., went to Sardi's to pick up the papers and started the route. It starts in Boaz, goes through many back roads and ends in Albertville. We were jamming out to music, cruising, and just having an awesome time. When we got to this one area on the back road straddling Boaz and Albertville, it was super dark, roughly about 1:15 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. We had to turn down this gravel road that ends in a cul-de-sac, where we got to deliver some papers. We turned down the music, headed down this gravel road, and spotted the houses. Behind the houses was nothing but thick woods. As we were putting the last papers in the mailbox, we heard this guttural shriek coming from the woods. We looked at each other and Jim asked if I heard it too. I confirmed, but before I could say more, we heard it again. Closer, like it was at the edge of the woods just 100 yards behind us. Jim decided we were done here, and we were leaving. Just as he got up to roughly 20 mph, we heard that damn shriek again behind us. I looked over at Jim, and he was looking not at me, as I thought, but out the window beside me, completely ashen-faced. It took only a second before I realized he was actually looking at something outside. I turned back and saw it. It was dark, darker than the surrounding night. I could see its silhouette against the dim light of the stars. It looked similar to a large bobcat, but as if someone had draped a tattered cloth over it. There were no visible legs, but it was clearly moving quickly. It came up alongside the car, never looking at us, and stayed there for several seconds. We were coming to a stop sign where the gravel road intersected with a paved road. Jim slowed down and the thing pulled slightly ahead. As we reached the stop sign, it somehow jumped over it. As it did, its cat-like head turned toward us, and we saw one large burning red-orange eye. It never touched the ground again. As we came to a stop, it shot off to our right, letting out the shriek one last time. Luckily, our route continued to the left. We were obviously freaked out and finished the rest of the route in record time, getting back home around 3 a.m., when ordinarily we would finish around 6 or 7:0 a.m. We had decided we were going to wake George up and tell him what we saw, but when we pulled in, George was already on the porch like he was waiting for us. He looked like he was about to say something, but the looks on our faces made him pause and ask what was wrong. We told him, and then he started questioning us about what time specifically we saw this thing, where exactly we were, and so on. Away and addressed the icebox with the question. Had Frank answered the question correctly, Frank would have had the informed disclosures completed right away. Thereafter, he looked at Jim and said, "Well, I'm sorry to say this, but Rick, not real name, hung himself on Lisa's, again not real name, porch earlier this morning." Rick and Lisa were two members of this group that I hadn't met. They had left the group about a year or so before I joined. It seems that during their time with the group, they had dabbled in demonology, and gotten themselves into quite the predicament. This was told to me months before when I was introduced to the group and learned why certain topics and practices were taboo. Without going into much detail, as I don't know much, Rick and Lisa had dabbled in dark stuff, messed with demonic entities, and even gotten possessed. Though most of that was eventually resolved, their relationship didn't survive. It seems that during our route, Rick had gone over to Lisa's and was trying to get her to take him back. He was apparently out of it, like he was drunk or high, but strangely coherent at times. After about an hour of him refusing to leave and making a nuisance of himself, Lisa called the cops. She told him and said he should leave, but she said he got real quiet. She heard some shuffling on the porch and then nothing. She thought he had left. This was around 1 a.m. The cops got there around 1:30 a.m., and when Lisa saw the lights, she opened the door. That's when she saw Rick hanging from the porch roof beams with his belt around his neck. Lisa's house was along the same paved road where the gravel road intersected, about 2 miles from where the demonic cat thing had disappeared. George guessed that Rick had never truly stopped messing with the dark stuff, and that what we had the misfortune of seeing was something coming to collect what Rick owed when he passed. I've had a few other interesting things happen in my life, but this one is probably, in my opinion, the most messed up. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton in San Diego, CA. On 72 and 96-hour Liberty, I would travel to my home up north. This experience took place somewhere along the Grapevine during one of those trips. I had a bad habit of cutting it close, often arriving just 30 minutes to an hour before formation. So it must have been between 1 and 2 a.m. around the year 2001. I was driving southbound on I-5. I'm not sure of the exact location, but the northbound and southbound lanes were divided at that stretch. There were no other cars around, and I was cruising at about 80 mph in the fast lane. As I drove, I entered an area with what looked like fog or maybe scentless smoke. It was thick but didn't behave like normal fog. It seemed concentrated. Then I noticed a reddish glow between the northbound and southbound lanes, coming from what looked like a factory. The glow reminded me of those early mornings in San Francisco when the fog surrounds industrial areas. I didn't think much of it, assuming I'd just never noticed it before, and turned my attention back to the road. That's when I saw it. Right in front of my vehicle, about 2 feet off the ground, was a child-sized creature running directly in front of me, no more than 10 feet from my bumper. I braced for impact, but none came. It stayed ahead of my car, matching my speed, and as I glanced at the speedometer, I realized I was going 83 miles per hour. The creature turned its head to look at me over its shoulder. Its face was unlike anything I'd ever seen, alien yet childlike. As soon as I made eye contact, it turned its head forward again and, in one smooth motion, angled upwards and ran into the thick fog above. A deep, resonant horn blared. It wasn't a car horn, it sounded more like a truck or rig, but deeper, almost otherworldly. The fog began to clear as quickly as it had appeared, and within a few minutes, I was out of the Grapevine. At that time, I had already done that drive at least 10 times round trip, and in the years that followed, I made another 30 trips through the same area. That was the only time something like this ever happened, but to this day, I keep my eyes peeled whenever I go through the Grapevine. This happened when I was around 13 years old. I've had several strange experiences in the house where this took place, but this one was by far the most terrifying. The day started off pretty normal. I woke up, went to school, and played some SNES until dinner. My dad worked late pretty often, so it was just my mom and me at home. After dinner, we usually watched TV together. At the time, our routine started with Wheel of Fortune, followed by Jeopardy! My bedtime was at 9 p.m., which I always thought was a little early for my age, but I didn't have much say in it. That evening, there was light rain and sporadic flashes of lightning. We were watching TV in the living room, and as usual, we hadn't bothered turning on the lights. Around 9, my mom told me it was time for bed. I got up, left the living room, and stepped into the family room. It was mostly dark, with only a faint glow from the TV behind me and a bit of moonlight coming through the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. That's when I felt it, that deep, primal sense that something was wrong. I turned to the right, toward the glass door, and saw it. Sitting about a foot away from the glass was a large Rottweiler, its eyes locked onto mine. I was already feeling uneasy, but I forced myself to brush it off. It was just a dog, right? It had probably wandered into the yard. Trying to ignore the fear creeping up my spine, I walked across the room, using the dim light to guide me. As I got closer to the door, I noticed the latch was undone. I reached out, locked it, and trying to regain some control over my nerves, I said aloud, "Can't get in now, can you?" The dog didn't move. It just kept staring at me. Then, it broke its gaze and glanced at the door handle before looking back at me. Slowly, the latch slid open on its own, and the door began to inch open, not in a sudden or violent way, but almost teasingly, as if mocking me. And then it spoke. "Nothing can keep me out." Its voice was deep and guttural, dripping with malice. As it spoke, its mouth twisted into an unnatural, chilling smile. Its eyes began to glow a dull, menacing red. It started speaking again, this time in a harsh, guttural language I couldn't understand. But I didn't need to. I felt it. Every syllable seemed to radiate pure malice, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. It was frozen in place, too terrified to move. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. When I opened them again, I was no longer in front of the door. I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, paralyzed with fear. I don't know how long I stayed like that, unable to move. Eventually, I managed to get up and leave my room. The family room was just as dark as before, and I had to cross it to get to the living room, where my mom was still sitting watching TV. I cautiously glanced at the sliding glass door as I walked by. The Rottweiler was gone. I didn't check for prints or signs of where it had been sitting, but the latch was unlocked. And while the door wasn't open several inches like before, it was slightly ajar. I've had other strange and creepy experiences over the years, but this one stuck with me the most. No matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, I know deep down that it wasn't. I know what I experienced that night. And it was real. Since childhood, my brother was always different. While other children had imaginary friends or played with toys, he claimed he could see figures that no one else could. At first, everyone chalked it up to a child's vivid imagination, but over time it became clear there was something more to it. Not only did he see these figures, but he interacted with them in ways that felt undeniably real. One of the first and most terrifying encounters he ever spoke about was with a mysterious man who appeared to him often. This man was no ordinary figure. He exuded a darkness, a presence so heavy it seemed to change the air around him. Every time he appeared, the room felt dense, as if the atmosphere itself recoiled. Despite this, my brother, even as a child, was unafraid. He spoke to the man, curious about who he was and what he wanted. One day he asked directly, "Who are you?" The man responded in a voice that was cold, hollow, and deeply unsettling. "I am a demon." In that moment, something shifted. My brother's natural curiosity was replaced by a palpable sense of danger. The air grew thicker, pressing down on him as though the room itself was alive and hostile. For the first time, he felt real fear. Gathering his courage, he told the demon firmly, "I don't want to see you anymore." The demon did not take this rejection lightly. Its eyes, which had seemed merely watchful before, now blazed with fury. The suffocating energy around my brother grew unbearable, filling the space with a darkness that defied the natural world. For days afterward, even when the demon didn't physically appear, my brother felt its presence lingering, watching, waiting. It was as if the entity refused to let go of him. But over time, he learned to fight back, not with anger or defiance, but by refusing to let fear consume him. Slowly, the oppressive presence began to wane, and the demon's influence over him weakened. After that experience, my brother changed. It was as if something within him had hardened or evolved. He began walking the streets at night, not out of recklessness, but as if seeking answers to questions that only he could understand. He wasn't afraid anymore. What once would have terrified him had become routine. From that point on, he continued to see other entities, shadows moving in the corners of rooms, figures in places where no one should be. But he was no longer intimidated. He had learned to exist alongside the spiritual world, accepting its presence, but refusing to let it dominate him. Even when others would have been paralyzed with fear, he stood his ground, his head held high. To this day, my brother rarely speaks of these experiences, but there's something in his eyes, a quiet knowing, a wisdom that seems beyond his years. It's as though he understands things the rest of us can't even begin to imagine. Though he never sought this gift, he's learned to live with it, and perhaps even to tame what once tried to control him. This is a relatively short story, but it's one of the scariest moments of my life. It happened last Sunday, November 17th. My friend and I decided to climb a mountain in our town to recreate a photo we had taken almost 2 years ago. It was for nostalgic reasons, to put it simply. At the start, we followed a trail, but it didn't lead to the top very quickly, so we decided to take a shortcut and climb directly to the summit. We had to push through bushes, branchy plants, tall grass, whatever those prickly things were. Some of them had spike-like fur that hurt when we passed through, but our jackets and pants provided at least some protection. That, at least, was what we were trying to do. It was dark out, with very little light, so we used our phone flashlights to navigate. After about half an hour of slipping, climbing, and pushing through branches, we finally made it to the top. The full moon lit up the view, and we could see neighboring cities from up there. It was breathtaking. After soaking in the sight, we started our way back down. We pushed through more branches before finding a trail path that led back to where we had started. It felt good to be back on a proper path. I offered my friend my left AirPod, and we listened to music as we walked. I put on my motivational playlist, and everything seemed fine. We were just about to exit the trail when I stopped to tie my shoe. Staying Alive by the Bee Gees was playing, and my friend was walking around waiting for me. Then he stopped and looked back behind us. I finished tying my shoe and was just about to get up when he said something that froze me in my tracks. "Get up, run, hurry." He grabbed my jacket and we bolted. I had no idea why we were running, but I didn't question it. As we sprinted, I glanced back but didn't see anything. After about 15 seconds of running, we slowed down. By now, we were in the city, walking on the sidewalk. It was still dark, but there were streetlights, store signs, and car headlights providing some light. I finally asked him why we ran, and he said the scariest thing he could have said. A dude came out of the woods behind us. "Son," I asked. "Really?" Because I hadn't seen or heard anything. He reconfirmed, saying, "Yeah. He just came out of the woods on the left." He meant our right, but it had been his left when he turned around. We kept walking quickly. checking behind us every few moments to make sure the man wasn't following. At one point, I asked if he still had my AirPod. He nodded, handed it back to me, and I put them both in their case. I decided not to listen to music for the rest of the night. I wanted to have full awareness of my surroundings. We eventually went to some stores to rest and calm down before his mom came to pick us up. We got home safely, but the whole experience left us both shaken. For clarification, my friend and I are capable of basic self-defense, but realistically, we couldn't do much. We're both teenagers still in high school. I'm 5'4", and while I've self-taught myself boxing for about 2 years, there's only so much I can do against a larger opponent. My friend is taller, around 5'7" or 5'8", and had a pocket knife with him for potential encounters with aggressive animals on the mountain. Still, we didn't want to take any risks. What if the man had a weapon, or worse, wasn't alone? That's basically it. One of the scariest moments of my life, and it happened just last week. I don't know if we'll ever go back to that mountain again, but if we do, we'll probably bring more people or go earlier in the day when it's brighter. I was driving on a road driven deeper into the countryside than in my home state. I reached a part with major highways for last resorts. I was driving on the slowest route through my town, Yosequa High School, heading deeper into the 2 parks. This means I was driving away from my local primary school where I had spent so much time playing basketball. It was around 8:37 p.m. I was almost past the 75% mark and soon to be out of the twin parks altogether. At some point, right in the middle of the 2 parks, I decided I wanted a snack. I parked my car to grab a Snickers from my bag, which was on the front passenger seat floor. This was a few minutes before reaching the cul-de-sac-looking road with a yellow house and another red-orange brick-looking house, for anyone familiar with the area. That is, if I hadn't stopped for a snack and had kept driving at the same speed. Anyway, I got back into the driver's seat, ready to hit the gas, when I noticed a deer in my rearview mirror. For some reason, I felt an irrational wave of fear. I mean, it's just a deer. There's no logical reason for me to be scared. But I've always had this weird general fear of wild animals because of things like rabies or other unlikely dangers. The part that still messes with me to this day is what happened next. I glanced back at the deer and I swear to God it was just standing there, staring directly at me, but with front-facing eyes. Maybe I was just tripping really hard. I didn't stick around to find out. I didn't slow down or stop to get a better look. Instead, I hit the gas and drove off as fast as I could. I didn't go home right away, though. I was too shaken. Instead, I went to grab some food at a restaurant, El Caporal, near El Caporal for those who know the area, to calm myself down. After eating and trying to shake the uneasiness, I finally went home. Even now, I can't explain it. It was probably just a normal deer and my mind was playing tricks on me. But the way it stared at me with those eyes, I don't think I'll ever forget it. I live in Florida and me and my friends used to enjoy ding-dong ditching. We thought it was pretty fun and we even had a system to figure out who would ring the doorbell next. Let's refer to my friends as Sam, Ted, and Jake. Our pattern was simple. First Jake, then me, then Sam, then Ted, and then we'd restart. It was summertime and one night we decided to go ding-dong ditching in this neighborhood behind ours. The area was full of big rich people houses. One house in particular caught our attention. It was huge and white. I later looked it up and it had 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. It was my turn to ring the doorbell, but there was a man standing by the door on a phone call. My friends insisted I had to do it anyway. When I turned to ring the doorbell, I walked up, rang the doorbell, and immediately bolted. The man who had been at the door opened it and started chasing us. We ran as fast as we could, and after a short distance, he gave up and ran toward his backyard instead. We hid behind some trees for what felt like 30 minutes, too scared to move. Eventually, we snuck back home. The next night, Ted's cousin came over and he wanted to try ding-dong ditching too. This time, we stuck to our own neighborhood. There was a big brick house, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, that we had always been wary of because the teenagers who lived there were known to chase people. Of course, we didn't tell Ted's cousin that. Instead, we convinced him to ring the doorbell. He rang it and sprinted toward us across the street where we were hiding behind some trash cans. That's when the oldest son came out, spotted him and chased him down. To our horror, they tackled Ted's cousin and dragged him into their house. Sam and Ted were at my house that night, so only Jake and I witnessed this. We watched as they marched Ted's cousin to Ted's house and had a long talk with his parents. They made us all apologize, and we never went near that house again. But that wasn't even the scariest part. A few weeks later, we decided to ding-dong ditch the house across the street from the brick house. It was my turn to ring the doorbell again. I rang it, but this time, a man ran out of the house with a gun. Can't even describe how far and fast we ran. We didn't stop until we were absolutely sure we were safe. And that was the last time we ever ding-dong ditched. Hey everyone, this is my first post on Reddit, and honestly, I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts or supernatural things. But after what happened that night, I don't think I'll ever be the same. I live in Pune, a bustling city in India, where life doesn't stop no matter the hour. It was a cold winter evening, and I was at my desk, sipping coffee, lost in my own world. My mom called out and asked me to get some medicine for her. Being the procrastinator that I am, I pushed it off, saying I'd go later. Time flew by, and soon it was 11 p.m. The streets were quiet, with the kind of eerie calm that only comes late at night. I grabbed my jacket, my bike keys, and headed out to the 24/7 medical store nearby. After picking up the medicine, I felt the urge to go for a late-night ride, something I often do to clear my head. There's a small bridge not too far from my place, surrounded by towering trees and shadowed by tall buildings in the distance. The bridge has a kind of haunting beauty to it, especially at night. Beneath it runs a dam, and when it's open, the rushing water creates a mesmerizing, soothing symphony. Here's where things get unsettling. In India, we don't bury the dead, we cremate them. And this bridge? It has 4 cremation sites around it, 2 at either end of the bridge. I didn't think much of it. I'm not superstitious, and honestly, I never believed in ghosts. It was midnight when I arrived. I parked my bike near the start of the bridge, lit a cigarette, and put on some music. The cold breeze whispered through the trees, and the distant sound of water made the setting almost surreal. At the far end of the bridge, I noticed a pyre burning, a body being cremated. I decided to stay where I was and not disturb the rituals. An hour passed, and I felt it was time to head home. But to do that, I'd have to pass the cremation site. Started my bike and began riding slowly. The closer I got, the more aware I became of the burning pyre. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow traversing the forest, and floating towards me at an ever-growing pace was a carefully prepared balloon. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I got closer, the shadow became clearer. A man, squatting right next to the burning pyre. I slowed down to get a better look, and what I saw still haunts me to this day. He was scratching his head, violently, almost like he was trying to tear his scalp off. His movements were frantic, jerky, and unnatural. His hair was catching fire from the pyre, but he didn't seem to care. Instead, he rocked back and forth, making these guttural, animalistic sounds. My heart froze. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body wouldn't move. Then he turned. In a flash, faster than anything I've ever seen, he snapped his head toward me. I'll never forget the sound. A sharp, crackling zap, like static electricity. His face was illuminated by the flames, and his eyes were hollow, empty pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. I don't know how, but I managed to kill my headlights and twist the throttle, desperate to get away without drawing his attention. But as I passed him, I felt a cold, piercing gaze, as if he was looking straight into my soul. I didn't dare look back. My hands trembled, my body was drenched in sweat despite the cold, and I rode faster than I ever have, praying he wouldn't follow. When I reached home, I locked every door and window, my heart still pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a high fever that lasted 2 days. When I finally gathered the courage to visit the bridge in daylight, there was nothing. No signs of anyone, no evidence of what I'd seen. To this day, I don't know if it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. But one thing is certain, I'll never go near that bridge at night again. A little backstory. Back when I first moved into the state I currently live in, I had done a bit of couch surfing before finally being able to find a roommate. We moved into a rather old apartment in the quieter part of the big city. When I say old, I mean radiator heating, electricity so bad that running too many things in the sockets popped the breaker, and so on. I was the first to move in because my roommate had not yet arrived in the state. They were moving from Arizona, so I was sleeping on the floor. Somehow I got up and crossed the hall to the bathroom to get some cold water, and I unpinned the nervous Prince of Wales cap to see what had happened. By default, I always close the door to the room I'm sleeping in, a force of habit, even if I am alone in a place. One thing I noticed about the door is that it took quite a bit of force to get it shut. No big deal. I got it closed, went to bed, and that was that. When I woke up, the door was wide open. I found it strange because I had given the door a little tug before bunkering down on the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time, until it kept happening. After a while, I noticed the apartment started to have a weird feeling. About a week later, my roommate finally arrived and moved in. On and off, weird things would happen outside of the door being open when I woke up. There were sounds of someone rustling in the kitchen, footsteps long after both my roommate and I had gone to bed. I would know if it was them because they always turned the hallway lights on when going to the bathroom or kitchen. For the 1.5 years we lived there, that seemed to be the only bit of disturbances, nothing major. Fast forward to a year later, and I had a friend from Colorado come visit for a week. The night had crept up on us, and we were planning to hit downtown early the following morning, so we turned in for the night. They slept on the pull-out couch in the living room, and I went to my room, shutting the door firmly. I passed out rather quickly, but I was only out for an hour before I was awakened by a creaking noise and the jiggling of my bedroom door handle. I opened my eyes, only to watch the door slowly open and then stop after it was wide open. I assumed that maybe I just didn't shut it properly, but it still felt weird. I got up, closed the door, pulled the hood of my hoodie up, since it was freezing. It was the dead of winter, and curled back into bed. Only a few minutes had passed before I felt something snatch hold of the hood of my hoodie and yank it back, as if trying to tug me along with it. I went stone still, feeling my heart racing. I had no idea what was happening, but I know I wasn't dreaming. Once everything had settled, my nerves included, I tried to get a little more sleep. Morning came, and I went out of my room to meet my friend, who was just waking up. I asked them if they had heard my door opening at all during the night. They looked confused, answered no, and got up for their morning routine. I cannot explain what happened. I may have been amping myself up out of fear, or it could very well have been a spirit in that apartment. Both are plausible, but it doesn't take away just how scary it was in the moment. I think about it now and then, and if I'm going to be honest, I'm so glad I moved out of that apartment later that year. Before I tell my tale, you need some context. When I was young, my family were heavily Christian, making me spend my Sundays at service and Wednesdays at youth group. I am not religious now, but those years instilled an awareness of the paranatural in me. As I grew up, I became more independent and rebellious, leading me to seek out forms of psychedelic, spiritual enlightenment. It just so happened that I deemed that a priority over having a place to stay. As a young adult hooligan living in a small farm town in the middle of the Willamette Valley, there weren't a lot of opportunities for kids my age. You either partook in substances, worked in the wine industry, or got involved in the numerous cults around. It was about 10 p.m., and as my friend and I were bumming smokes from patrons behind the local bar, there were about 5 people. My friend and I excluded. We were all a tad bit tipsy, sharing tales and shooting the crap, when a man walked out that I had never seen before. He was about 5.5 feet tall with odd proportions, donning a burly mustache that did not fit his face. He wore a cowboy hat 2 sizes too big, a leather jacket over a plain white tank top, leather pants and boots to finish off his outfit. He kind of just stood there, trying to be a part of the group, yet excluded through some metaphysical divide. After about 10 minutes of loitering, he started talking. He mentioned it was his birthday and referred to himself as the birthday boy. On and on, he would only talk about how it was his birthday, that he needed a cigarette because it was his birthday, that someone should buy him a drink for his birthday. I'm pretty sure it was his birthday. 30 minutes passed, and the patrons slowly started filtering out until it was just the birthday boy, my friend, and I. He asked us if we knew where any abandoned buildings were and if we could take him to one. I was already unnerved, but at this point my entire being was screaming at me to get away from him, like a switch had flipped, and I could feel some sort of evil intention radiating from him. I gave some sort of vague direction of a non-existent building and told him goodbye. He asked me if I would take him there and celebrate his birthday with him, and that he had gifts for us. I told him no, as I needed to make it to a friend's house to go to sleep. He told me, and I quote, "I'll see you again, Noah," and gave a huge, inhuman grin. He then proceeded to sprint backwards for about 30 feet. Yes, backwards. Spin around and run in the direction I gave him. I looked at my friend and we both started running in the opposite direction, cutting through side streets and jumping a couple of fences. We ended up making it to my friend's house and making it inside. About 20 minutes passed. We were chilling inside and smoking, and I heard someone singing "Happy Birthday to You." I peeked out the window, and it's the fucking birthday boy. I don't know how he found us, but he paced up and down the street for an hour or two until he gave up and sprinted away. I never saw the birthday boy again, but I'll never forget his parting sound. Click, clack, click, clack, the sound of cowboy boots furiously smacking the pavement. Deleted. I don't know what the heck he was, but he was not human. To the birthday boy, let's not celebrate together, ever.